If you had to choose between honor and love, which would you choose? That question's not just for poets and dreamers. Out here, on the edge of the world, it's as real as blood in the dirt. Some choices don't leave room for both. Some loves, no matter how deep, were born beneath a sky that won't ever allow them to bloom. And if you're not careful, the wind out here carries more than dust. It carries whispers, and whispers can kill. It was the spring of 1872 when Isaac showed up at the Barkley Ranch. Tall, quiet, the kind of man who kept his gaze low and his words even lower. The others didn't ask many questions. Out in Wyoming territory, a strong back and silence were worth more than a name. But Clara noticed. She always noticed. Clara Barkley was the kind of woman who didn't belong to the land but couldn't live without it. Her father, Elias Barkley, was the sort of rancher the West had a way of hardening. Thick hands, sharp rules, and a voice that made even the cattle freeze. He had built the ranch with sweat and steel, and he guarded his legacy with the ferocity of a man who had lost too much. Clara was his only child, and he'd be damned before he handed over the keys to a soft-hearted daughter, or anyone not cut from his cloth. But Clara had her mother's fire. She read books by lantern light, painted wildflowers on scraps of saddle leather, and some nights, when the wind blew just right, she'd sneak out past the barns and stare up at the stars like they might tell her something more was waiting beyond the hills. That's when she first saw him, Isaac, by the back fence, mending a post long after the others had retired. The moon caught his face in profile, sharp, still, almost haunted. He moved with purpose, not pride, wore his silence like a coat. And in a land full of shouting men, his quiet was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Of course, a ranch girl noticing a ranch hand wasn't much of a tale. Not out here. But Isaac wasn't like the other men. He was black. And in 1872, in a white man's world, that meant more than just the color of his skin. It meant a past he didn't speak of, and a future he wasn't allowed to imagine. Not with someone like her. And yet, the pull was there, gentle at first, like the hum of bees in the summer air. She found reasons to pass near the corral while he worked, asked idle questions about horses just to watch his hands move. He never said much, but when he looked at her, it wasn't with fear, it was with something deeper, something he didn't have the right to name, and neither did she. Because love out here wasn't a soft thing. It was dangerous. It didn't arrive in poems or letters. It bled. It burned. It asked for everything. The first time they spoke alone, she was patching a tear in a saddle blanket in the tack room. He walked in with an armful of rope and stopped short when he saw her. They both froze. Then he nodded, polite, about to walk out. But she said his name, Isaac, and just like that, the air between them changed. He turned, slow, careful, like a man who'd walked into fire before. Yes, Miss Clara. Her heart kicked against her ribs. She didn't know what she was going to say, only that she had to hear him speak. She asked if he liked the work. He said it was honest. She asked if he missed the East. He said the West was quieter. She said she didn't know where she belonged anymore. And he looked at her, not with pity, not with want, just truth. Most of us don't, he said. Not really. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She thought of his voice, his steadiness, how he hadn't backed away from her words or tried to own them, just listened. And somehow, that was enough to make her feel seen, really seen. But the wind was already starting to shift, and the land has a way of warning those who dare to reach across its invisible lines. The next morning, her father mentioned Isaac at breakfast. "Saw the boy out by the fence line," he said, cutting into his eggs. "Works hard, doesn't talk much. Good, that's how it should be." Clara nodded, but her hands tightened around her cup, because she knew her father. That tone in his voice wasn't praise, it was possession. A man like Elias Barkley didn't believe in gratitude. He believed in keeping people where they belonged. And in his mind, Isaac belonged under the sun, not beside his daughter. But the heart doesn't take orders. Not from the land, not from blood. And that's how it begins. Not with fireworks, not with declarations. Just a girl and a man, in a world that doesn't want them to meet, but where the silence between them says more than words ever could. Now tell me, what would you risk for a love the world tells you not to touch? If your heart whispers one truth, but your blood commands another, which do you obey? There are choices we carry that no one sees. Quiet decisions, like seeds buried under snow. But in time, those choices bloom into wildflowers or thorns. And out on the frontier, where silence rules and judgment comes swift, even a glance can plant a storm. Clara tried to stay away. After that first real conversation in the tack room, she told herself it was just curiosity. Just a moment. Just a man doing his job and a woman too lonely for her own good. She'd lie in bed at night, staring up at the ceiling's wooden beams, repeating her father's old words like a spell. Know your place and stay in it. But that's the thing about spells. They only work if your heart wants to be saved. Each day that passed, she found herself drawn to the places Isaac might be. The barn at sunrise, the well at dusk, the trail behind the hill where the horses grazed. She'd pretend she was sketching, or gathering herbs, or anything but what she was really doing, waiting, hoping, listening for the steady rhythm of his boots in the dust. And Isaac, he noticed. Of course he did. He was no fool, but he never pushed, never lingered too long, just nodded when they passed. Let his gaze meet hers, just long enough to say, "I see you, and I won't forget." It was a small fire that started between them, slow, careful, not the kind that roars with heat, but the kind that keeps you alive through a long winter. One evening, when the sky was the color of burnt copper, Clara brought a basket of cornbread and dried apples out to the men around the fire pit. Her father was off in town, dealing with cattle prices. That left her in charge of supper. She moved among the cowhands with ease, polite smiles, brief words, the kind of small talk expected of the rancher's daughter. But then she caught sight of Isaac, sitting a little apart like he always did. Not excluded, just separate. The way the world had taught him to be. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something wordless but sharp as lightning. She stepped toward him, hands trembling just enough that the cloth in the basket shifted. One piece of cornbread tumbled free and landed at his boots. He looked up, hesitated, and then he picked it up and said softly, "Thank you, Miss Clara." She smiled. Not the kind of smile you give a neighbor or worker. The kind that says, "I know what this is, and I know I shouldn't want it." That night, after the fire died and the wind rose, she found herself back on the porch, wrapped in her mother's old shawl, listening to the coyotes howl in the distance. But all she could think about was the way his voice had brushed her name, the way his hand had lingered just a moment too long when he took that bread. She knew it was wrong, knew it would never be accepted. Not here, not now. But when has the heart ever asked permission? The next afternoon, while tending the garden behind the house, she heard a sound, a low whistle, faint and wandering. She turned and saw Isaac beyond the fence line, driving a small herd toward the upper pasture. Their eyes met again, and for the first time she didn't look away. Later, she walked the fence to where the trees began to thicken, and there, beneath the shade of a cottonwood, she waited. Not long after, he came riding through, slow and easy, like he didn't mean to stop, but he did. He dismounted without a word, tied the reins loose on a branch, then stood beside her in the hush of the trees. No one said anything for a while. Then Clara spoke, barely above a whisper. "You ever wish things were different?" He didn't look at her, just stared ahead at the ridge where the sun bled orange through the pines. "All the time. I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted, "but it feels like I'm awake. And I don't want to go back to sleep." He finally turned to her then. "You know what happens if we're seen, if your father finds out." "I know," her voice cracked. "I know." The silence wrapped around them again, but now it pulsed with the ache of what they couldn't say. "I didn't come here looking for this," Isaac said. "I've spent my whole life staying out of the way, keeping my head down. I've seen what happens when people like me step out of line." "I don't care what people say," she whispered. "I just care about what's real." He looked at her then, like she was something sacred and doomed all at once. And when he reached out, just enough for their fingers to graze, it felt like a prayer spoken on a battlefield. Because this wasn't just love, it was defiance. And in that place, in that time, defiance came with a price. Now, let me ask you, if you found a love worth dying for, but the world said it was wrong, would you still take their hand? If keeping someone safe meant pretending you didn't love them, could you carry that silence every day? The thing about secrets is, they get heavy. Not all at once, no. They start small, light as cotton on a breeze, but they settle in the bones. They live in the glances you don't share in daylight, in the paths you take just to avoid being seen. And before long, they own you. Clara and Isaac didn't speak of what had passed between them under the cottonwood. There were no promises made, no kisses stolen, just the brush of fingers, the tremble of restraint. And yet, it changed everything. Now, each morning, when Clara walked through the stables or passed by the bunkhouse, she didn't see just another ranch hand. She saw the man who made her feel whole, real, the man who made her forget what she was supposed to be. And Isaac, he carried it like a man who'd been taught early that happiness was dangerous, that getting too close to joy was like walking out on the thin ice, beautiful at first, then deadly. They found ways to be near each other, not obvious, never obvious. But when she brought water to the hands during branding season, she always started at the far side, where he worked. When he fixed a fence near the creek, she'd find herself sketching wildflowers just a few yards away. No one said anything. Not yet, but eyes have a way of learning patterns. One night, Clara sat at her vanity, brushing her hair out under the dim lamp. Her father had returned from Cheyenne, irritated from the road and muttering about rising feed costs. As she listened to him move about downstairs, heavy and restless, her stomach knotted. Elias Barkley was a man of rules, of control. He didn't beat his daughter, but he didn't have to. His expectations were a cage wrapped in velvet. She had been raised to smile at the right men, sit straight at the table, and one day marry someone respectable, which meant white, rich, and willing to take over the ranch. And Isaac was none of those things. But Clara had begun to realize something she couldn't unlearn. All her life, she'd been taught to choose safety, reputation, honor. But not once had she been asked what made her feel alive. And Isaac did. That weekend, there was a barn dance in town, the kind where the fiddles played until midnight, and the scent of whiskey mixed with sweat and wood smoke. Clara wore her blue dress, the one her mother used to say brought out the gold in her eyes. She danced with Thomas Dillard, the banker's son, tall, talkative, and safe. Everyone smiled when he spun her across the floor, but Isaac was there too, leaning against the far wall, near the horses, pretending not to look. Yet every time she caught his eyes, it was like the rest of the room vanished, and for a moment she stepped outside into the dark, heart pounding like a caged bird. She didn't expect him to follow, but he did. They stood by the old hitching post, just out of sight of the barn's lanterns. Music drifted out behind them, muffled by distance and longing. "I shouldn't be here," he said. "I shouldn't want you to be," she answered. Silence. Then soft, "But I do." He looked at her, then, truly looked. And the ache in his eyes wasn't just desire. It was fear, hope. A man who knew what happened to others like him when they dared to love outside the lines. "I've seen what they do to folks like me," he said. "Seen men dragged behind horses, hung from trees for less than a touch." Clara felt the truth of it sink into her skin like frostbite. "I'd never let them hurt you." "You can't stop them, Clara," he whispered. "Your love can't shield me from a rope." She wanted to scream, to run, to find a world where skin didn't matter, where a father's rage couldn't kill, where love could just be. But they weren't in that world. They were here. "I can't stop loving you," she breathed, and with a trembling hand she reached for his face. He closed his eyes. Let her fingers rest on his cheek. Let the moment live, just for a heartbeat longer than he should have. Then he pulled away, gently. Like a man stepping back from the edge of a cliff he wanted more than anything to leap from. "I'd rather carry this love in silence," he said, "than bury you because of it." She stood alone after he walked away, heart breaking and swelling all at once, because sometimes the deepest love isn't the one you shout from rooftops. It's the one you protect by staying hidden. So, tell me now, would you rather live a quiet truth in the shadows, or destroy everything for a love the world will never understand? What if protecting the one you love meant becoming the very thing you feared? Would you do it anyway? There are moments in a life where everything slows, where the morning sun stretches too long across the floorboards, where the air holds still like it knows what's coming before you do. Out here, in the open plains, those moments are warnings. Not spoken, not shouted, just felt. Like a shiver in the soul before the storm hits. It was a Sunday when it all came undone. The day started like any other. Roosters crowed. Dust lifted from the cattle pens. Coffee boiled over black coals in the bunkhouse fire pit. Isaac was out early, working the lower field with the oxen. Clara was helping in the kitchen, sleeves rolled and hair pinned tight. But under it all, there was a hum, a silence that didn't belong. It was her father who broke it. He came back from town early, boots clapping against the porch with a rhythm that never meant anything good. The door slammed. His voice cut through the house like a knife through rawhide. "Where's Clara?" Her name sounded wrong in his mouth. Too sharp, too loud. Her heart dropped before she even heard the second sentence. "I had a drink with Henry Dillard," he barked. "Says his boy saw you walk out behind the barn with the help. You care to explain what the hell my daughter was doing alone with a black man in the dark?" The kitchen fell silent. The cook froze. Clara stared at the flour on her hands like it might save her. Then she spoke. "I wasn't hiding." That's all she said, but it was enough. The storm in her father's face didn't come all at once. It built slow. His jaw clenched. His nostrils flared. The kind of rage that doesn't explode, but calcifies. "You're gonna tell me you've been carrying on with that boy? In my house? Under my roof?" He stepped closer, his breath hot and thick with tobacco. "You're willing to throw away your name for someone like him?" She raised her chin. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally claiming something that's mine." The silence that followed was worse than yelling. That night, her father didn't speak to her again. But Isaac knew. He knew the moment Clara didn't come to the fence line. Knew when the ranch hands began looking at him sideways. When no one spoke to him over dinner. When his name, once just a whisper, became a weight in the air. It was only a matter of time. He packed a bag before dawn. Didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note. But Clara saw him through the window, saw the silhouette of him walking away from everything he had known here, saddle slung over his shoulder, head low. She couldn't let him go, not like that. She ran barefoot across the yard, dress clinging to her knees in the morning dew, reached him by the edge of the stable, breath ragged, hair unbound. "Don't go," she said. "I have to," he replied, eyes refusing to meet hers. "Your father will see me strung up before he lets this continue. You know that. You think I care what he'll allow?" Her voice cracked. "I love you, Isaac. That's the only truth I have." He finally looked at her then, and for a moment, all the pain, all the love, all the fear poured into that gaze. "And I love you, Clara," he said, voice low. "But out here, love like ours gets people killed." She took his hand. "Then let me leave with you." "No," he said. "Too fast. Too firm. This isn't your burden." "Yes, it is," she cried. "It became mine the second I saw you. The second I knew what I felt was real and worth everything." The sun was rising now, casting long golden light across the dry earth. And then a voice cut through it. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Her father. He stood on the porch, rifle in hand, not raised, but not resting either. His eyes locked on Isaac. Cold, hollow, ready. Clara stepped in front of Isaac before she even knew her feet were moving. "You'll have to shoot me too," she said. The world held its breath. The old man stared at her. For a moment, something broke in his face. Something lost. Then he lowered the rifle, slow and deliberate. "You're no daughter of mine," he muttered. And he walked back inside. That was the last time Clara ever saw her father. She left that morning with Isaac. No plan, no permission. Just a horse, a bag of coins, and a love of the world had told her to bury. But sometimes you choose the fire over the comfort of a lie. So I ask you now, if your heart knew the truth, but the world called it shame, would you stay in the safety of silence, or would you walk into the storm? If everything you once were, your name, your family, your past, was stripped away by the choice to love, would you still call it worth it? They didn't ride off into the sunset. No cheering crowd, no music. Just dust rising behind their horse and the echo of a slammed door that had once been her home. Clara looked back once, just once, to the ranch house she'd grown up in, the porch where she'd learned to walk, the window where she watched the storms roll in with her mother. But there was nothing left for her there now. Not with a father who had already buried her in his mind. Isaac didn't speak for a long while. He held the reins tight, eyes on the road, as if each hoofbeat took him farther from a noose he'd narrowly escaped. They rode until the land turned soft and green, where the air didn't taste like resentment. They found a patch of high meadow, ringed with cottonwoods and scattered wildflowers, miles from the nearest town. A cabin stood there, long abandoned but still standing, barely. It wasn't much, but it had a roof and walls. And for two people who had just lost everything, it was enough. Isaac fixed the place up with his hands. Clara gathered herbs and traded sewn goods in town under a false name. They built something. Not a perfect life, but a life that was theirs. Sometimes at night, when the fire burned low and the wind slid under the door, Clara would stare into the orange glow and remember how close they'd come to losing it all. How easy it would have been to say nothing, to let fear win. But she didn't, and neither did he. Still, some wounds don't bleed. They wait. And grief has a way of visiting even the happiest homes. One morning, Isaac came in with a letter. He held it like it might catch fire in his hands. "It's from the Barkley Ranch," he said. Clara took it with fingers that trembled. Her name was scrawled in a hand she hadn't seen in months, her father's. Inside, just 4 lines. "You made your choice. I'll never understand it. The ranch will pass to Thomas Dillard. Don't come back. You're dead to me." Clara didn't cry. Not then. She simply folded the letter and placed it beneath the floorboard beside the hearth. A tombstone no one else would see. That night, she sat beside Isaac and asked, "Do you ever wonder if we made the wrong choice?" He turned to her slowly, eyes soft with the weight of all they'd endured. "I wonder every day," he said. "But then I look at you, and I know I'd choose you again, even if it meant losing everything." She reached for his hand, their fingers laced like roots in the earth. "I just wish love didn't have to come at such a cost," she whispered. "It always does," he replied. "Out here, love's a kind of rebellion." Seasons passed. They planted vegetables, repaired the roof, built a small fence for goats. They laughed, fought, loved, grew old, and yet the past never fully let go. One spring morning, after a long snow, Clara stepped outside and saw something blooming by the cabin door. A single yellow flower, bold and bright against the thawing earth. She smiled, bent down, brushed the petals with her fingers. "You see this?" she called to Isaac, who was chopping wood near the tree line. "Told you they'd grow here." He walked over, wiping sweat from his brow, and knelt beside her. The two of them, side by side, in a place that once knew only silence and snow. They had made something beautiful out of nothing, something living from what had nearly died. Because love, real love, doesn't bloom where it's safe. It grows where it's not supposed to, where it's hardest, where it takes root in defiance of the world. So I'll ask you one last time. If choosing love meant exile, shame, danger, would you still follow your heart through the wilderness? Would you still plant it where the wildflowers grow?